Thanks for joining everybody that's here and everybody that's watching the recording later on. You are here for Nutrition Fundamentals, Everyday Nutrition for the Athlete, presented by Corinna Coffin. And today she's going to be talking about the idea that nutrition can be complicated, but it doesn't have to be. Understanding basic nutrition fundamentals is an important starting point for anyone interested in taking charge of their health and impacting their performance as an athlete. In this presentation, she's going to cover the basics of nutrition for health and sport, discuss trending nutrition strategies, their implications and considerations for training and performance outcomes, as well as review practical applications for implementation in everyday life. I'm going to do a short intro and talk a little bit about Gnarly Nutrition, who's sponsoring this clinic, as well as all of them in our series. I'm only going to take up a few minutes of your time, and then I promise I'll fade into the background and pass it off. But my name's Shannon O'Grady. I'm the Chief Operating Officer and General Science Nerd at Gnarly Nutrition, and I'm super excited to introduce Corinna because she's an amazing athlete. She's a friend. We've played together a fair amount and have a lot of respect for her. For those of you that don't know Gnarly Nutrition, we are a NSF certified supplement company. We produce great tasting science-backed supplements for athletes. Please check us out at gonarly.com if you're not familiar with our products. I think you'll be impressed by what you see. We are in the midst of a campaign that started in November and continues until January, where we've invited athletes and experts to talk about topics around the ideas of preventing injuries, recovering from injury, and general guidelines for establishing and maintaining basic health, things like what Corinna's going to be talking about today. Nutrition. We've been calling this campaign Longevity in Sport, and we've had a lot of great clinics. If you haven't had the opportunity to sign up for the previous clinics, please check out the ones we have remaining and sign up for those. We will be eventually releasing all of the clinics, but right now you only get the clinic recording sent to you if you've pre-registered for it. That recording, just so you know, will be emailed within 24 hours. And then you can watch it as many times as you want. We'll also send any notes or anything that Corinna wants us to include in there that she thinks will be helpful. Also during this campaign, we've launched one of our newer products, Gnarly Collagen Pro. On the 15th, next Tuesday, I'm going to be talking kind of about the science behind collagen supplementation, as well as a few of the other products that Gnarly Nutrition has in the pipeline that we'll be releasing in the next month. So if you haven't and you have the time, check out that clinic as well. Research pretty strongly supports the idea that collagen supplementation, along with other things like appropriate rehab and exercise, can help both reduce the risk of injury and potentially help you come back from an injury. So I'll get into the science of that next Tuesday. I already talked about the clinic recording. I also want to mention that we have a pretty amazing giveaway with lots of products to help promote recovery in sport, things like skincare from Joshua Tree and products from Add-A-Day for recovery, and a full Gnarly lineup of supplements to help you recover well from workouts. You guys should check out everything that's offered and sign up for that. You can find the sign up on our website and also via our Instagram page. And then lastly, at the end of this clinic, you're going to get a little survey that asks you for feedback on the clinic, feedback for Corinna, which is, I think, really helpful for any presenter. So if you have the time, please do that. And if you find an amazing tidbit of information that you learned from Corinna, or that you were impressed by, her presentation as a whole, which I'm sure you will be, please, post on all of your favorite social media channels, tag Corinna, tag Gnarly Nutrition, and we will be sure to repost. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Corinna. Corinna is a registered dietitian, athlete, and coach whose mission is to help others lead healthier, happier lives through nutrition and fitness. A Virginia native, which I am as well, Corinna attended Virginia Tech for her undergrad, where she received dual degrees in human nutrition, food and exercise, and Spanish. During her time there, she competed at the university's club lacrosse and triathlon teams, as well as discovered a CrossFit and obstacle course racing. Some of Corinna's athletic accomplishments over the last 6 years include a second place finish at the 2014 Spartan World Championship, 2017 Tough Mudder X champion with a second place finish in 2018, two-time CrossFit Regionals and CrossFit Games competitor, and most recently, the 2019 Spartan Stadium Series female champ. Through competing, Corinna developed an even greater passion for nutrition, particularly the influence of diet on health and performance, and decided to pursue her master's degree in sports nutrition at the University of Utah. Corinna currently serves as the registered dietitian for a Salt Lake City nonprofit, Fit to Recover, and runs her own remote nutrition coaching practice. So I'll pass it on to Corinna, fade into the background. And Corinna, if you need any help or anything, just give me a shout. I'll be listening.
Awesome. Thank you, Shannon. And I just want to say thank you all for attending. I feel really honored to host this. And just a word about Gnarly. As a registered dietitian, I'm very careful about the brands that I endorse or the types of products that I endorse. And so I was kind of staying away from any type of supplement companies. And then when I discovered Gnarly and talked with Shannon and learned more about their products, it was such an easy buy-in for them to be one of their athletes and be supported by them, because I love their products. I believe in their in the quality, in the ingredients, and it's really hard to find. There's a lot we can navigate through in the supplement industry, and I think Gnarly does a really great job. And I love that they're doing this longevity and sport clinic, and nutrition has been a huge portion of my longevity in my sport. I feel like I've been competing for a long time. And I feel like I have a lot to attribute to nutrition. So I want to share some of the basics with you guys today, and I hope you take away something beneficial from here. So here we go. I'm going to talk today. I'll give you guys a little bit of a really brief introduction, because Shannon did such a wonderful job with that. We'll review our objectives. We'll go over the nutrition basics. I do want to dive into some energy systems and substrate utilization, because I think that's really important to understand in order to figure out or determine what your nutrient needs are. We'll talk about fueling recommendations, especially around that pre, during, and post-exercise time period. We'll get a little bit into weight management. I'll review some of those key takeaways, and we'll have time for Q&A at the end. Shannon already touched on everything, but this is kind of my timeline from essentially my undergraduate years up into most recently 2020. So I've been studying nutrition for the past 10 years now. I didn't think I was that old, but I guess 10 years seems like a long time. So I wanted to include this today because hopefully, I'm sure there's a bunch of diverse backgrounds when it comes to sports and in whoever's listening to my presentation today. So hopefully I can be a little bit relatable. My experiences can be a little bit relatable to those in the endurance side of sports, but also maybe the strength training athletes and maybe CrossFit style or HIIT training people as well. So have some experience kind of all across the board, from really long distance races to the short stuff. So my objective with this presentation today is to help enhance your understanding of the basics of nutrition, obviously the role in health and performance, help you understand the energy systems in relation to nutrient needs and utilization, performance nutrition recommendations, like I said, and then really focus on safe and effective weight management strategies, because there's a lot of strategies out there, but not a lot of them are safe and effective. So let's see. All right, so going into the basics here. So we're going to start with the types of nutrients. We have our macronutrients and our micronutrients. So macro meaning large, these are the nutrients needed by the body in large quantities. These are protein, fat, and carbs. Technically, alcohol is considered a macronutrient too. And this is how we classify nutrients or calorie nutrients from our food. Whereas our micronutrients are needed in smaller amounts, relatively smaller quantities in the body. These are vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, phytonutrients. And those phytonutrients are those chemicals found in trace amounts of food. They are what contribute to disease prevention and are really beneficial, even though they're not required for life. So just a quick breakdown with the macronutrients. You should be able to calculate the total calories in a certain food based off of the macronutrient breakdown. So for every gram of protein, there's 4 calories. For every gram of carbohydrates, there's also 4 calories. Fat contains 9 calories per gram, and alcohol, which is a sneaky little guy because people don't realize how highly caloric alcohol can be, and that comes in at 7 calories per gram. And I think it's important to note that while we have these technically four distinct macronutrient groups, there's a lot of foods that overlap in each of those categories. So we don't want to ever like classify foods strictly within one category or another. There's a lot of foods that overlap. So diving into carbohydrates first. So these guys get a bad rap, but carbohydrates are especially important when we're talking about physical activity. These are what drive high intensity exercise specifically. They fuel our muscles. Our brain requires 130 grams of carbs, of glucose as stored carbohydrate per day. And it's important to note that we have limited body stores of carbohydrates. So we can store, if we're completely topped off or maxed out in our carbohydrate storage in our bodies, we've got about 500 grams of carbohydrate. So our muscles can store about 400 and our liver can store about 100. And that plays an important role in our blood glucose levels. So these are finite and we have to keep replenishing those stores in order to have maximal output when it comes to exercise. Recommended ranges for carbohydrates, if we're talking about total energy or total daily calories, 45 to 65%, which might seem high to you all, but depending on your activity level, that percentage, you can be closer to that 65% if maybe you're not very active, and we can obviously be on the lower end of that range. But carbohydrates are extremely important. We'll go more into them in a sec. But it's important to also note that not all carbs are created equal. And I think that's where carbohydrates get a bad rap. Everyone's like, oh, it's like, we don't want, people are so anti-carbohydrate, but it's important to realize and to distinguish between the different types of carbohydrates. So we have simple carbs and we have complex carbs. And these aren't two very distinct categories. There's a lot of foods that overlap within the two categories. But to make things a little bit simplified, we'll start with simple carbs. So we call them simple carbs because they break down very easily, very rapidly. They provide our bodies with a quick boost of energy. They're great for topping off stores before exercise. So a lot of our pre-workout carbohydrates should come from simple carbohydrate sources. So examples of that might be fruit, raisins, dried fruit, whole fruit, honey, milk, yogurt. Some other options, of course, that are less whole foods based might be, candy bars, Gatorade, any type of like quick glucose sports products. Those are also going to be very rapidly digestible and fall under that category. And then we have our complex carbohydrates. So they're complex, they're a little bit more challenging for the body to break down, which most of the time is a good thing. We want to focus on complex carbs because that means we're able to feel fuller longer, because usually these contain higher amounts of fiber. And what fiber does is keep that food in our stomach for longer. It allows for more nutrient absorption in the stomach the longer it sits in there. And if your stomach isn't emptying as quickly, you're going to feel fuller for longer. So the majority of your daily carbohydrate intake should be from complex carbohydrate sources. And that's where I think a lot of people fall fall into some trouble there is that if you assess the majority of carbohydrates in the standard American diet, most of those are not considered complex. They're not those whole grain sources. So this is a really important differentiation between types of carbohydrates. So our starchy vegetables, our whole grains, high fiber fruits and vegetables, beans, those are all going to fall under those complex carbohydrates. So moving forward with those types of carbohydrates, this is actually a slide that I borrowed from Shannon herself, since she's a nutrition expert, guru, PhD. But I think this does a really great job of kind of showing us the difference between simple carbs and complex carbohydrates. So in the red, we have simple carb options or high glycemic index foods, which means when we consume those foods, our blood sugar levels spike quite high. And then after you have a high spike, you have a very low dip. Whereas, if you have something that doesn't spike your blood sugar as much, it stays fairly level, and you're not going to have those swings of high blood glucose, low blood glucose throughout the day. So the high glycemic index foods, of course, increase our blood sugar quickly. We want to time these primarily around exercise. Before and during is helpful to keep those blood glucose levels elevated. And then afterwards, we want to get those carbohydrates to our muscles very quickly. And so this is a great time to include those types of foods. Whereas our low glycemic index foods, are best to consume throughout the day. They contain a lot of micronutrients and fiber, and they contribute to our overall glycogen storage in our muscles. So moving on to protein. Protein is an important macronutrient, of course, because it's what we often think about when we think about muscle building. It builds and repairs muscle tissue, so extremely important post-workout, which I'll get more into. Very key for bone health. It improves, even though it's only 4 calories per gram and fat is 9, it's actually the most satiating of the macronutrients. And so you'll see a lot of times protein amounts increase for individuals who are looking to lose weight because it is so satiating. It provides a great deal of structure and support when it comes to muscle tissue and ligaments. And in terms of daily protein intakes, we're looking at 1.2 to 2 grams per kilogram of body weight. And I have high quality in parentheses there because, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but our high quality protein sources are usually from animal products because they are more bioavailable, which means our body is going to be able to absorb more of those nutrients from animal sources than from plant sources. That does not mean that we have to include those in our diet. It just means that we have to be a little bit more aware of our protein intake if we are eating primarily plant-based or vegetarian or vegan, just to make sure that we're meeting those needs. In this next slide, oh, sorry, jumped ahead. I'll get there in a sec, but I did want to point out different animal sources of protein and plant-based sources, because I think a lot of people, when they hear, oh, I have to increase my protein amount, I think everyone automatically thinks about meat, and there's so many different types of options out there. So I think a balanced intake of both throughout your day is a great approach. But nut butters, nuts, lentils, beans, tofu, chia seeds, all types of seeds, soy milk, whole grains, those are all going to be plant-based sources that contain fairly large amounts of protein. So that's definitely a way to increase your protein amount throughout the day, even if you are consuming some animal products. So this is this is a great study that talks about protein distribution throughout the day. So I think in the past, people were, and food experts and dietitians and researchers were were focused more on total protein intake throughout the course of your entire day. And hey, as long as you hit, let's say, just example, 100 grams of protein for your daily total, you're good. Like you'll be helping build lean muscle mass. And what this study shows is that they had 3 different groups. The bolus dose, it was given 40 grams of protein twice, spread out throughout the day, which is you'll see at that top line. This intermediate group, which is what I have circled in red, shows 20 grams of protein given to individuals spaced out every 3 to 4 hours throughout the day. And then the last group was smaller amounts of protein in 10 gram segments, spaced out every 1 to 2 hours throughout the day. And the totals all come out to 80 grams over the course of the given day. But the study showed that the intermediate amounts of protein spaced out every 3 to 4 hours proved to build the most, show the most increase in muscle protein synthesis. So if that's something you're looking to do, build muscle or maintain lean body mass, that would be kind of the recommended distribution of protein throughout the day. And the focus should be there as opposed to this daily total that you're just trying to reach. So based off of that study, I think this little sample meal plan that I put together quickly is maybe a good representation and real life application of what that might look like. So maybe, you know, you'll see the timings kind of spread out every 3 or so hours. And we're looking at that 20 to 30 grams of protein at each meal and snack. Now, of course, sometimes snacks are going to be smaller and might have closer to 20 grams. Whereas your bigger meals might be closer to 30. And if you're a larger individual, of course, your needs might be greater than 30. But I thought, you know, this kind of breakdown of food intake throughout the day would easily replicate that study and be something. If I plan this out so that if you are working out between 5 and 7, this would support that kind of daily schedule. Of course, if you're working out in the morning, this would look slightly different, but just notice that all of those, the breakdown of protein there is about 20 to 30 grams for most of your meals, and then having some of those snacks mixed in there. And you guys can look at this later in the recording if these are some like meal and snack ideas that you might want to include in your daily routine. And lastly, we'll talk about fat. So fat's the last macronutrient. And fat, as we discussed, 9 calories per gram, it's very energy dense, but it's a really important part of the diet for athletes and any type of individual. We have fat soluble vitamins, vitamins A, D, E, and K, and those need a fat source in order to be absorbed. So if your dietary fat intake is very low, you're going to compromise your ability to absorb those vitamins, and that's going to put you at risk for nutrient deficiency. So it's very important. It also is extremely important for fueling long, lower intensity bouts of exercise. It plays an important role in hormone production. Obviously, it provides cushion for our organs and offers some sort of protection for our body. And our recommended ranges are from 20 to 35% of our total daily calories. Anything less than that 20% is where we're going to start compromising that nutrient intake, and that's going to be a little bit dangerous. So definitely stay within that 20 to 35%. I'll talk a little bit about fad diet trends and what that might mean, but fat, very important. Don't skip out on it. But at the same time, we want to be mindful that we're not going too high in fat and compromising the amount of carbohydrate that we can include in our day. So here's where we're going to move on to energy systems. And I think that this will help hopefully clear up a little bit of confusion maybe around carbohydrate versus fat for substrate utilization for our bodies. So I have this little breakdown here, and we've got our three primary energy systems. So on the top to bottom, it goes from shortest and highest intensity down to longest duration and lower intensity. So we have our phosphagen or phosphocreatine system, and these are bouts of exercise lasting anywhere from 8 to 10 seconds usually. So 100-meter sprinter or like a power lifter, very short, very intense And you usually have a lot of rest between those types of sets in order to allow that creatine, that phosphocreatine to come back up. Then we have our glycogen lactic acid system. So this is our anaerobic glycolysis system. And this is anywhere from, it says 1.3 to 1.6 minutes, but you're looking anywhere from like 40 seconds to 2 minutes or so. And then lastly, we have our aerobic respiration. So these are longer durations. There's an unlimited time frame for this. So it's anywhere from essentially 2 minutes on, and that's where we're going to be we're requiring oxygen for this type of energy system. So in this breakdown on my next slide, which Shannon had also used in a presentation, and I really liked the layout here. On the bottom, we have exercise intensity, and on the right-hand side, on our y-axis, we have our ATP or energy needs. So in the green, if we start out with our aerobic carbohydrate and fat metabolism, or our aerobic respiration from the last slide, our aerobic respiration system, we're going to be using a lot of fat. Doesn't mean we're only using fat, but we're going to use primarily fat with lower intensities, like that 0 to 40%, with a little bit of carbohydrate. As that intensity increases and we work toward that anaerobic glycolysis phase, we're going to start utilizing more carbohydrates. So around that 60% of our VO2 max from an exercise intensity standpoint, we're going to start transitioning a little bit more toward carbohydrate utilization. And then for our phosphocreatine system, the most intense short bursts of high intensity exercise, that's where we're almost solely using carbohydrate. And so I think this graph is really nice because it allows you to see that, wow, the higher the intensity is, the more our body is utilizing carbohydrate. And so if you are, and wherever you fall under that spectrum in terms of your primary mode of exercise, or if you're an athlete, depending on what sport or discipline you're in, that will give you a little bit of a better idea of the importance of how your diet needs to reflect that intake. So if you are a longer distance runner and you're running a lot of low intensities, maybe you do need to have a little bit higher than that 35% of total energy intake from fat. Whereas if you are a high intensity CrossFit athlete or power athlete, you're going to need toward that higher end of carbohydrates, maybe that 65% of total energy intake. So I hope this helps with that breakdown and understanding substrate utilization. Now let's get into the fueling recommendations. Here's what I'm going to get into some specifics with regard to sport and training and fueling during and pre and post training. So if you haven't heard of these athlete plates, I think it's just a really nice breakdown of what your plate, what your meal should look like throughout the day as an active individual or an athlete. Obviously, if you are an athlete, or even if you're not, your training volume and intensity throughout your week is likely going to vary from day to day. So we need to adjust our eating to match that demand. We're not just going to eat just because we're an athlete. Doesn't mean we're going to eat the same every single day, regardless of intake. So I think the athlete plates are a great tool to adjust your eating to meet those physical demands. So just to review, for an easy training day, or maybe if you're looking to manage your weight a little bit better, maybe you lose a little bit of weight, half of your plate should be fruits and vegetables. A quarter you're going to be looking at for your lean proteins, and then another quarter might be the whole grains. And notice there's like that little sliver cut out of that pie that says weight management. It's a little blurry, but you would reduce the amount of carbohydrate from your whole grains in order to account for a calorie deficit, if that's something that you are trying to do. Whereas if you are increasing to a moderate training day, you'll see that whole grains, or that grains category, increase a little bit. And our vegetables, fruits and vegetables are still very much present, but now our fruits are going to maybe be provided as more of a snack option throughout the day. And we're still going to have those vegetables present at our meal. Protein stays the same. Our fats have bumped up to a tablespoon. And finally, for a hard training day, now our grains, our carbohydrates, those starchy carbohydrates are going to contain about half of our plate. Vegetables, while they are very important, they are not the main priority on like a very hard training day or race day. And so those will take a back seat just for that day in order to optimize carbohydrate intake. And then again, our protein is fairly consistent from a daily basis. Fat also increases here to 2 tablespoons. And again, these aren't exact measurements or recommendations, but you get the idea of what needs to be prioritized depending on the day and what can take a little bit of a back seat. So pre-exercise fueling, this is where we want to focus on those higher glycemic index carbohydrates. Carbs should be the focus pre-exercise. I think sometimes people get a little bit confused about what the priority should be before a workout. And if we're asking our muscles to contract for any period of time, we are going to want that to be fueled. The only option for that to be fueled is from those carbohydrates. Our carbohydrates our muscles store carbohydrates and carbohydrates only. And so muscle contraction is going to be what's fueling that. Or sorry, carbohydrates are going to be what's fueling the muscle contraction. We also want to focus on low fat and low fiber options, which I think is maybe something that gets missed a lot. If you are consuming a high amount of fat before your workout, your body's going to be spending a lot of time to digest that fat while you're working out. And so that's not ideal, and you'll likely throw that up or not be able to reach an intensity that you'd like to. So same with fiber. As I mentioned earlier, the fiber is going to keep food in our stomach for longer. It slows that digestion. And so we don't want to be working out with a lot of food in our stomach. So keeping low fat, low fiber foods away from that immediate pre-exercise fueling. But if we have several hours between a meal and our workout, then we can have fiber, we can have fat. Find foods you can tolerate. So this is a big one. If you are an athlete or you're training for a certain event, you need to know what sits well in your stomach and what is going to cause any type of GI upset or any other adverse outcomes. So it's important to experiment with foods during your training and not experiment with new foods prior to or leading up to a race day or on race day. You also want to include fluids pre-exercise. So these can sometimes include sports drinks that have carbohydrates and provide you with that hydration. But you definitely want to maintain hydration throughout the day and into your training session. So this is a little bit more of a specific pre-exercise fueling breakdown. So in that meal, 3 to 4 hours before your workout, you're going to want to focus on a balanced meal, right? You don't need to be omitting anything, fiber or fat from that meal, but you do want to focus on having a higher carbohydrate meal. So if I'm working out let's say I'm working out at 3:00 and I'm eating lunch at 12, that's a great timeline. I have about 3 hours to digest, which is great. But I'm going to want to focus that meal a little bit higher in carbohydrates than some of the other meals throughout my day. Protein is going to be moderate. So that 20 to 30 grams is extremely appropriate for our protein intake. But we want to make sure that our fat's low to moderate. We don't need to be having a super high fat meal right, even if it's 3 hours before our exercise, because that will likely take a little bit longer to digest. And then as a snack, so 1 hour before, and give or take, I'm someone who I could eat I could eat like a slice of toast with some peanut butter, a little bit of peanut butter, banana, honey. I'm pretty good about eating that like 30 minutes before and I'll feel great for a workout. But some people have really sensitive stomachs and they're like, no, I need at least an hour before my workout in order to digest that or to digest a snack. So that's something you have to play with yourself. But we do want to focus on mostly carbohydrates for that pre-workout snack. So again, if it's within an hour before your workout, you want to focus on simple carbohydrates, low fiber, low fat, and protein's not that important if it's that hour before your workout, unless it's your first meal of the day. So if you're breaking that fast, that overnight fast and working out in the morning, it would be helpful to have a little bit of protein or BCAAs in your breakfast prior to your workout so that your muscle's not breaking down as much as it would otherwise during that session. So moderate protein. Then fueling during exercise. So this is a nice little cheat sheet just to show that, less than 45 minutes in duration. We don't really need to get exogenous carbohydrates from, external food sources. Can drink water as needed. Anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour and 15 minutes of sustained exercise or high intensity exercise. That's when we may want to include some smaller amounts of carbohydrates. The mouth rinse is something that's been included in recent research and has shown some positive outcomes, which is essentially just rinsing your mouth with carbohydrate, getting that neural connection from the sweetness in your mouth or those carbohydrates in your mouth, but not actually swallowing it. And apparently that has shown some beneficial outcomes in terms of performance. So this might look like a sports drink or any type of gels or goos or chews. And then if we are going for longer endurance events, anywhere from an hour to 2.5 hours, this is where we're going to want to focus on larger amounts of carbohydrates. So that 30 to 60 grams per hour. That doesn't mean you have to consume those 30 to 60 grams all at once. A lot of sports nutrition products contain anywhere from 15 to 25 grams of carbs in a pouch. So that might look like every 20 to 30 minutes having a gel or having a goo or something like that. And then for our ultra endurance events, 2.5 hours plus, this is where we can get up to 90 grams per hour of carbohydrate. But of course, for these longer events, we want to make sure that we're focusing on hydration as well. So that's where those sports drinks or carbohydrate solutions to mix into your water is helpful. And this is definitely where we want to trial and error some products leading up to an event to make sure that we do not experience any GI distress. So the 30 to 60 grams, the 60 grams per hour, the average individual is going to be able to oxidize or utilize 1 gram of carb per minute. So 60 minutes in an hour. So that's where the 60 comes from. So too much more than that in an hour, especially for shorter endurance events, is going to just sit in your gut and cause a lot of GI distress. And then we have our post-exercise fueling. So call it the 3 R's. We want to focus on replenish, replace, and repair. So we're going to replenish with fluids and electrolytes post-workout. This is more important for longer bouts of exercise, of course. We want to replace carbohydrates that were utilized during that exercise session. And we want to repair protein because exercise stresses our muscles, breaks down our muscles, those tiny micro tears, and protein is what's going to allow us to rebuild that. So when it comes to post-exercise fueling, within 15 minutes or as soon as possible after a workout, up to an hour, this is where it's really important to consume protein and carbohydrates. So the recommendations are about a 2 to 4 to 1 carbohydrate to protein intake. So if we're looking at 15 to 25 grams of protein, depending on our size, we need to at least double that amount in carbohydrates. And if it's going to, depending on the duration and the intensity of that exercise session, you may be closer to that 3-to-1 or 4-to-1 carb to protein ratio. So carbohydrates is definitely important, like I said, for that, replacing those lost glycogen stores during exercise. Salty snack and water or a sports drink is great to help retain some of that fluid and keep us hydrated, rehydrated post-workout. And then within the next 2 to 4 hours, I'd say probably even like within the next 1 to 3 hours of that workout and having that post-workout snack, that's a great time to have a larger meal and more fluids. So we're looking at balanced carbohydrates. We want to still include lean protein, again, that 20 to 30 grams. And we want to keep fat still kind of low to moderate. We don't want to go too high on fat post-workout because we're still trying to get those nutrients to our muscles. So we don't need to have tons of fat, slowing that digestion process. But aside from that pre and post workout meals, that's when fat, that's when you can go a little bit higher in fat. But low to moderate fat is always a good goal throughout the day. I don't have time to play this, I don't think, but if you guys haven't watched this, it's a pretty funny video on just like diet trends over the years, and all of the, like this is good for you, and then the next year something comes out that, oh no, that's actually bad for you and this is good for you. So I recommend you watching it. If you want a good laugh later, you guys can click on this. But we're going to talk about popular diet trends. So why are popular diet trends, why are they so popular? Why do we need to label ourselves or fall under a certain category? Why is that trendy? And I think for a lot of people, they feel like they'll get a competitive edge, especially athletes. Like, what can help them get a competitive edge over their competitors? The promise of quick results, right? And usually these are more extreme approaches to nutrition or diet. And, with that often comes the quicker results. And then also there's readily available information. You can find a lot of do's and don'ts lists for each diet. And I think people like being told what to do and not having to think about it to a certain extent or for a certain limited amount of time. And then it gets to a point where it's unsustainable. So the benefits. So we'll talk about some of these trendy eating patterns and the benefits, the potential benefits on performance. So these can certainly help individuals, lean out, lose body fat. And in some cases, that can certainly aid in performance. For a lot of people, following these trends can improve diet quality, eliminate a lot of the junk, and less nutritious food options. For other people, it gives them a renewed focus, energy, confidence to meet a goal. A lot of times, around the new year, people are really excited and motivated to follow something very strict and sustain that for some time. And that being said, they like the strict rules, like the guidelines. It takes out any type of guesswork and provides structure. But so the performance dilemma. So on contrary to that, we have to consider the implications of eliminating an entire food group and the essential nutrients that takes out from our intake. So if you're on a low carbohydrate diet or very minimal low carbohydrate diet or high fat diet, which severely reduces carbohydrates, we are going to see a decrease in energy. You'll see a decrease in your athletic performance and in your ability to recover. Same thing if we take out animal proteins, we certainly can. I am not anti-vegan or vegetarian by any means, but it does make it challenging to reach your protein needs and goals for strength and recovery. And there are additional steps and planning that it requires when you restrict larger groups of food. So they pose more challenges when you're eating out. They pose more challenges in general, and long-term adherence, which is big. We're talking about longevity in sport today. So we have to bring it back to long-term adherence. And a lot of times these types of trendy eating patterns are questionable in the long run. And, they provide a lot of time constraints. Food restriction just in general is only sustainable for so long. And then what, right? Then you go back to your normal eating patterns, and have you really accomplished a goal that's worthwhile? So my bottom line, the more dietary restrictions that someone implements requires, the more time and effort and meal planning is required. It also can certainly increase your risk of nutrient deficiencies. It can have performance implications, and it's likely not sustainable long-term. So the more dietary restrictions we have that aren't, due to an allergy, a severe allergy or intolerance, it's not ideal for performance outcomes. So I just wanted to throw that out there, that the more restrictive our diet, the less options we have, the harder it kind of makes our lives. And I'm not a big proponent of increasing restrictions just for the sake of being restricted. So that being said, talk a little bit about weight management, and I'm going to focus more on weight loss, because I think that's likely what we see most of in my younger populations. I see a lot of desires for weight gain, but today I'm going to focus on weight loss. And I just wanted, especially for an athletic population, I really wanted to talk about considerations prior to undergoing some sort of weight loss initiative. And a couple things. I've got 5 things here listed. The timing is really important to consider. So if you're an athlete or an individual who's looking to have a peak performance or has a race coming up and you want to do really well in it, it's not the best time. That is not the best time to try to lose some weight. So usually the off season is great for that, or the furthest away from that peak performance time is when you want to focus primarily on weight loss, if that is something that you feel like you need to do. You have to consider performance. If anytime you're in a caloric deficit, your performance is going to be hindered. And so you need to consider if you're willing and able to take a hit on your performance for a little bit while you undergo some sort of weight loss. The sustainability. So like I talked about, if some sort of practice that you're doing is not sustainable in the long term, you need to consider if that's the best option or the best approach to your weight loss. You also need to consider the health and nutrients. A lot of times people just reduce their intake, but if you don't have a really great diet and you're reducing your intake of food, that's even less nutrients that you're getting to your body. So it's really important to focus on high quality, nutrient dense foods. And then I added current diet cleanup, because a lot of times we can achieve some body composition changes just by focusing on our macronutrient distribution in our diet and where those foods are coming from, whether they're processed or more whole foods based. And that usually does not have to entail any type of caloric deficit. It could just be, I'm going to start focusing on higher quality foods and change up the types of food I'm eating rather than trying to do some sort of caloric deficit. So a couple of my recommendations for weight loss strategies: avoid very low calorie diets. Just anyone and everyone, this is not a good approach to losing weight. Quick weight loss, it's always tempting. Everyone wants to lose 5 pounds yesterday, but a lot of times that can result in an actual decrease in lean tissue and muscle mass and strength. So with rapid weight loss strategies, a lot of times the weight loss includes our lean muscle tissue. And so that's not ideal for losing weight. You want to lose fat mass. You don't want to lose muscle mass. So that usually happens with very low calorie diets. We also, our glycogen stores, our body's carbohydrate stores are significantly decreased, which is inevitably going to lead to a decrease in energy for performance. We'll feel tired all the time. Oftentimes, more often than not, this leads to inadequate nutrient intake or deficiencies. So, that sounds like the making of a pretty irritable person, in my opinion. And then you have the emotional distress with hunger, being constantly fatigued, having high cortisol levels and high stress. So avoid very low calorie diets. And then in terms of, so that's kind of the big don't, but in terms of the do's, there's a couple things. So increasing our protein intake, I put within reason. We don't need to go too crazy there, but as I mentioned earlier in this presentation, increasing our protein intake will help with, creating more satiety around meals. So the fuller we feel after our meals, the better, right? Because we're not going to necessarily eat more if we have higher protein amounts and we're feeling fuller. So up to 2 grams per kilogram of body weight for protein amounts total over the course of a day. This could even be closer to 2.2 grams per kilogram or a gram per pound of body weight. So that would kind of be your top end. You're not really going to see much benefit beyond that, but increasing protein is definitely a great strategy. You also want to build your meals around nutrient-dense foods. So our nutrient-dense foods are going to oftentimes be our fruits and vegetables, whole grains, beans, legumes. So a lot of those plant foods, minimally processed plant sources are going to contain maximum nutrients and high fiber. Is going to take up a lot of space in our stomach, which is going to increase those feelings of satiety. I also included lean meats, poultry, seafood. Those are all lean sources of proteins. Nuts and seeds are great, and eggs, low-fat dairy. We also want to increase foods that are high in water and fiber. So like I said, with the food volume, the greater the food volume, increase satiety as well. So these are all ways to go approach your weight loss feeling full throughout the day, feeling like you're getting your body enough food, because you are, and you're also getting your body enough of those nutrients, but with minimal calories. So maximum nutrients for minimal calories is kind of what the goal is there. So lastly, and how am I doing on time? Cool, this is almost perfect. I wanted to kind of summarize this presentation for you. And I know I'm just kind of touching on the very basics at very surface level, but I'm hoping that this provides a good overview for you all. But I do want to leave you all with, prioritizing your health. I think any type of goal that you have, or in life, it always makes sense, and it's always going to benefit you to prioritize your health. Even when things get crazy, there's a lot of things we can do to keep health a priority and still manage everything else going on in life. Eat real food. So we don't really need to overcomplicate things. Obviously, with sports nutrition in mind, sometimes that turns into food products around workout times or during workouts, but otherwise, you're really going to focus on mostly eating real food. Don't need to super, overcomplicate things here. Carbs are very important. So I don't want anyone leaving here thinking that they can just cut out all carbs from their diet. You just need to adjust the carbs to meet your physical demands. And we talked about sources of carbohydrates and which types of carbohydrates make more sense throughout the day, whereas which ones are best for pre and post workout. Spacing protein out throughout the day, those 20 to 30 grams every 3 to 4 hours is going to maximally stimulate muscle protein synthesis. So aiming for that at each meal, and maybe closer to 20 grams for snacks is going to meet the energy needs for most individuals throughout the day. Eat something before and after training. You should not leave a workout and go hours without food and expect your body to recover and repair in the same way that you would if you ate something. And I think that's a really big point of contention, and a lot of people miss that opportunity, miss that window. So carbs and protein are key. Include those, especially post-workout. Consider strategy, timing, and performance when it comes to weight management. So we talked about those good strategies for weight loss, determining what time of the year, what time in your schedule makes sense to lose weight, if that's something you're trying to do, and the performance implications that weight loss has. And then my biggest one is formulating a nutrition game plan for the day ahead. Life is busy. We all have stuff going on throughout our day, but if you can take a moment either in the morning, or for me, I like to think about the next day, the night before. I'm like, okay, what do I have going on tomorrow? What does that look like? Where can I fit in my nutrition? What does that mean? What time can I eat? What time do I have food packed? Do I have like an assessment of what food I have available in my fridge? Have I prepped anything that I need to if I'm on the go the next day? So taking a little bit of extra time the night before, the morning before you start your day, is a huge key in, in eating well throughout the day and staying on track with our nutrition. So I hope that was helpful for you all. Again, I feel like that was the quick and dirty. So happy to answer any questions you all have. Feel free to email me. I provided my email here. I have a website, and I do offer nutrition coaching. And so if that's something that you're interested in, you can certainly reach out to me via email or on my website, and follow me on social media. I would love to connect with you all and share some of my life with you all as well. So thank you guys.
That was so great and all encompassing. You covered so much good info. Have a couple questions, and guys, go ahead and add more questions if they come to mind. I'm just going to go through them one by one. So I just read a fascinating article on Outside Online about protein recommendations for athletic women in menopause and perimenopause, 1.1 grams per pound of body weight per day. As someone in this age group, how can I get enough protein but still include enough carbs for good performance? Right now I eat fairly high protein and moderate fat with low carbs, but I think my energy wouldn't tank as quickly if I were to be eating a higher amount of complex carbs, but can't figure out how to add more carbs without adding too many calories. It's a great question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Shannon too, feel free to chime in, because obviously you share that passion and in nutrition.
And I'm old.
You're not old, but yeah, I think, and if I'm interpreting that question correctly, I think one thing with plant-based protein sources is that there's most of the time they offer a good amount of carbohydrates as well. And so, beans, lentils, whole grains, those are great ways to still increase protein while also getting complex carbohydrates in there. So I think, and Shannon, you can kind of correct me if I didn't answer that question appropriately, or if that wasn't what the root of the question was, but that would be my recommendation is those plant-based proteins are going to offer more carbohydrates in your day and also allow you to work toward your overall protein goals as well. But again, I do think those high quality sources of protein are going to be helpful to add in throughout the day as well. Those things. Yeah,
I think timing of those high quality protein sources too, like if you're timing them around your training, that might be where it would be more important to get protein that's more easily digestible. So something like a dairy protein or a meat-based protein that's high in leucine, high in essential amino acid content, and is going to be digested pretty easily, because it's going to have implications on your recovery. Whereas, getting the plant-based proteins that are a little harder to digest and might be a little bit lower, and some of those essential amino acids could be distributed throughout the day.
Yeah, exactly. And I love the Gnarly nutrition. I know, like, obviously this is a Gnarly hosted PowerPoint, but one of the reasons why I decided to even partner with Gnarly was that how good tasting their protein products was. I don't supplement with much, but I do have, I personally have challenges meeting my protein needs throughout the day. I really rely on the whey. I use their whey protein and also their vegan meal replacement as just more calories, more like carbohydrates, fat, and protein throughout the day if I'm on the go and need to hit my protein targets.
Thanks, Corinna. The next question, you walked through some food plates and talked as if this is day of. What can you tell us about carb loading or leading up to a performance day? For instance, replenishing glycogen stores for endurance athletes who may be depleting those stores during training.
Yeah, I think the carbo loading is a little bit, I guess I don't really love calling it carbo loading. There's obviously a huge, there's an emphasis on carbohydrates the week leading up to, or the couple days leading up to an event, especially if it's a bigger, longer event. You're certainly going to want to make sure that you're getting carbohydrates at each meal and snack throughout the day. And you're going to want to pay particular attention to carbohydrates above all the other nutrients leading up to it. But the old sense of carbo loading where, you know, the huge pasta dinners the night before a race or event is just going to sit heavy in your stomach and not provide you with the, you know, what you're looking for on come race day. So I think it's making sure that, you know, the 36 to 48 hours, especially before your event, you have a focus of carbohydrates at each meal, and just like the athlete's plate, recommendations that I showed, you know, you're going to want half of your plate looking, you know, with a combination of complex carbohydrates and simple carbs as well to top off those glycogen stores.
Yeah, if you don't do it before your long training runs or long training rides, you shouldn't do it before your race. I mean, you should be eating the exact same way. And through just a taper, I mean, I've read this, Corinna, and I'm curious what you think too, but through tapering and reducing your output during those weeks leading up to your competition, you're essentially carb loading without adding a ton more carbs, because you're reducing how much you use those stores.
Yep, that's the latest I've read as well. Makes sense. So yeah, so we don't need to gorge ourselves with carbohydrates in days leading beforehand, but you are going to want to make sure that is a focus. We're not going to just leave the carbohydrates out and expect to perform well.
How do you feel about intermittent fasting as a strategy?
As a strategy for weight loss?
It doesn't say, maybe Cecil, if you want to follow up and say if you meant a strategy for weight loss, or some people use it as a strategy for better sleep or health as a whole.
I'll answer in two contexts. I think the first one I'll answer in terms of just intermittent fasting in general. For an athletic population, I am not a fan of intermittent fasting or time restricted eating, simply because there is just not enough time in a typical day to meet most energy needs. You know, if you're restricting that window of eating, then that limits the amount we can spread out that protein intake throughout the day. But also, you know, depending on your workout schedule and your daily schedule, it just might not make sense. You know, if you're training early in the morning, let's say you have a 6 a.m. workout. If you finish that workout at 7 o'clock and you're like, oh, well, if you're doing like a 10-hour window, let's say feeding window, so 7 o'clock, 9, 10, 11, 12, you'd have to finish eating. If you did have a post-workout, you know, shake or meal at 7:30, let's say, you'd have to be done eating by 5:30 p.m. And that's fairly unrealistic for most people if they're getting off work and trying to eat dinner with the family by that time. So, and on the flip side, if someone works out in the morning and they're like, oh, well, I can't eat till 11 a.m. because I'm doing my fasting, now you've missed an incredibly important window of opportunity to get important nutrients, protein, namely protein and carbohydrates, to your muscles. And now you're in a catabolic state where you're experiencing muscle wasting, your body's breaking down more muscle tissue in that post-exercise state because it can't recover, and you haven't given it the tools that it needs to rebuild and replenish. So I don't love the strategy in most scenarios, especially with an athletic population. Now, if you're not an athlete and you're looking a little bit more for like weight management or weight loss or even weight maintenance, that could be something where if you tend to snack heavily at night, and it's a little bit of like incessant needless snacking after like 9-10 p.m. and you're just snacking just to snack, and you think like implementing some sort of time window where, you know, that's realistic, but maybe it's like 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. That's a 12-hour window. Some studies have on time restricted eating and intermittent fasting have shown some metabolic benefits by having, you know, a 12-hour fast. So 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. sounds pretty realistic. I think sometimes that's my eating window and I'm not even trying. So I think that in some cases it can be helpful in that regard. Would you agree, Shannon? Anything that I missed?
No, I totally agree. I mean, I think, you know, while there's some research about circadian rhythms and the idea that, you know, eat time restricted, like 12 hours and under, maybe 10 to 12 hours can help with a lot of health outcomes. Those health outcomes that they talk to are also related to reducing calories as a whole. So it's hard to separate whether it's just a reduction in calories and not the time window. So yeah, I mean, research is ongoing always about those things, but I 100% agree with what you said. Okay, any supplement recommendations for rock climbing and those dealing with tendon soft tissue recovery?
Wow, well, what a great question, because I feel like this is great for the Gnarly collagen protein that I've been using for the past 3 weeks now, since I've gotten it, and I know it's available now, right, Shannon?
Yeah.
So, but I will say with that, and Shannon has been kind of spearheaded this, and she knows what she's talking about. But I learned this from Shannon, actually, was that, you know, post workout, our collagen protein is not going to be the best source of protein because it's lower in leucine, and that leucine is one of our amino acids that is incredibly important for initiating that muscle protein synthesis. And so we want to make sure we're utilizing or using a protein that has high leucine content. So that's going to be oftentimes your whey protein or your milk-based or animal-based proteins aside from collagen. So Shannon, I might let you finish that out if you have anything.
Yeah, I mean, it's also pretty low in essential amino acids. Like when you rate it against other proteins, it's a pretty crappy protein, just based on amino acid content. Where it gets interesting is that, you know, there's a lot of research showing that the three main amino acids, hydroxyproline, proline, and glycine, and potentially peptides, which are small groups of amino acids in collagen, can stimulate collagen synthesis. There's some research too that whey protein can also do this, you know, and they haven't compared those two head to head. So it's hard to know if one's better than the other, but I'd say the research is pretty convincing. So I'm going to spend a lot more time talking about this next Tuesday, specifically going into the science and talking about what the research shows and what it doesn't. But it's recommended that you take collagen in the 60 minutes before you exercise. So it's easier to digest than other proteins, but there's no like marker telling collagen to go to your joints or to, you know, in the case of climbers, you know, to your elbows or to your fingers. And so taking it before and exercising those musculoskeletal tissues helps the blood flow, helps get the collagen, peptides, and amino acids to those joints. So it's really important for it to be effective that you take it before exercise. So once again, it's a little different from those proteins that Corinna was talking about because the use is also different.
So, I mean, to going back to the question, if you're looking just for a good post-workout protein supplement or protein option, I think the Gnarly whey protein is, or just any type of, whey protein isolate is a great option if you can tolerate it. I think that's going to be one of your highest quality protein options out there. And it's easily digestible and absorbable. So,
yeah. So Deb is asking how we can get a copy of the slides, and it was very informative. Thank you. So Deb, we're going to email you within 24 hours. You'll get a recording of this whole talk. And then Corinna, I don't know if you want to share PDF, we can email that out as well, like of the actual slides, if people are interested in that.
Awesome. Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. I'm glad you found it informative, Deb. Thanks.
I feel like my greatest limiting factors are my limited skills, knowledge, and creativity in the kitchen. What are some good resources to gain knowledge in the kitchen so a person like me can utilize the information you provided? That's a great question, Arsh, because I think a lot of people deal with that.
That is a great question. And I think that we're fortunate. I'm the same way. I'm like, I don't want to spend a lot of time cooking. I don't think anyone is all about, unless you're a chef, I don't think necessarily anyone is really looking to spend a lot of time putting together meals. And so at least through my own personal experience, I kind of opt for food options that are going to be, I can quickly throw together to create a balanced meal. So in those athlete plates, we have our lean protein, we have our whole grains, we have our fruits and vegetables. The great thing is that fruit is so easy to have on hand, right? We don't need to prep anything with that. In terms of like convenience options for protein, I think like anything like Greek yogurt or those single serving Greek yogurts, tuna pouches, jerky, roasted chickpeas, nuts, like those are all great sources of protein that aren't going to require you to do any prep, and they're going to be great for on the go. Whole grains, it gets a little bit more complicated maybe for those, but I think, if you have a good rice cooker or can even have a time, I'm not a meal prepper at all, but I will say on Sundays or any type of the week, if I have some time at home and I can throw some sweet potatoes in the oven and do something else during it, or if I can just throw on the rice cooker and have some quinoa or make some overnight oats for breakfast in the morning, that's really nice to just have bulk items on hand that are really easy to cook, and I can do other things instead of having to monitor them in the kitchen. And then, vegetables like bell peppers, snap peas, carrots, those are things or even frozen vegetables where you can easily throw on the stove in the microwave or just eat raw. And, now we're meeting all of those athlete plate groups. So I think kind of thinking, you don't have to get too creative with them. Pinterest is my go-to for kind of coming up with like fun recipes that are or sauces or dips or things that are going to make those taste a little bit more exciting. But yeah, it doesn't have to be this extravagant process to meal prep or to plan out food for the week.
Yeah, I do the same thing, Corinna. I don't really meal prep, but I make in bulk things that I know that I use a lot, like grains like quinoa and brown rice, and the proteins that I know I'm going to eat a lot, and then, some vegetables. And then you can use them in different ways. You can saute them together in a pan. You can layer them in a bowl and create, the power bowl that has, your grain and your vegetables and your protein. You can add a bunch of greens and make it more of a salad. And I typically, like, time is short for me, but I have cookbooks that I like, and they're good athlete focused cookbooks. Like, I don't know if you've seen the Run Fast, Eat, no, maybe like Eat Slow, Run Fast, or I'm getting it wrong, but it's by Elise Kopecky and Shalane, I forget her name. She's a world-class runner. Those are good, like whole food based, like well-rounded recipes. The Feed Zone cookbook is a good, and I'll pick like one or two a week you know, and just to try something new. And then I, you know, sometimes if I like them enough, you know, it adds to my repertoire. I build off of it later. But then you get to try something new every week and you kind of get excited about it, but you're also not overwhelmed by having to cook something every night.
And I will say, like, I work a lot with my clients who, I have some clients who eat the same exact thing every single day for a month. And that's when I'm like, okay, let's try to work in some variety there. But it's okay to eat the same thing for several days in a row. I will say, like, during the work week for me, I'm overnight oats. I'm on an overnight oat kick right now. I prepped a lot of vegetables, sweet potatoes, and I just include a protein source. And that kind of looks the same each day for, you know, my Monday through Thursday at least. And I just make sure that I try to switch up the foods each week. So, like, you know, if I bought eggplant and bell peppers and onions like one week, I'm going to try to branch out a little bit and, like, maybe the next week switch up the vegetables. But it's okay to be on repeat if you can tolerate that and you're good with it. You know, I think getting variety, not necessarily feeling like you have to get variety every single day and change it up all the time, but, you know, just every couple of days or maybe every other, you know, every week you're changing things up, is a good approach. So that's one thing I'll add.
So we've got another question. Recognizing the best workouts are the ones that are done. What are your thoughts about morning versus evening workouts?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, well, so in my personal experience, I think it depends. I don't know what the latest research, I can tell you if it's like, you know, if there's research showing that, you know, mornings are better for, you know, longer endurance bouts versus evening is, you know, better for strength. I can't 100% say I know, like, what the latest research is showing there. But I will say, like, I think it's a little bit up to personal preference. And if you're doing like a high intensity strength session in the morning, but you don't have enough time to fuel beforehand and get, you know, a solid meal or at least a carbohydrate rich snack beforehand, you're probably missing out on reaching that full potential that you would otherwise if you could be fueled for that, in which case it might be better to do that in the evening and be fueled beforehand. Whereas if you're doing something that's a little bit lower intensity and more sustained aerobic exercise in the morning, it doesn't really require you to reach those higher intensities and utilize a lot of carbohydrate, and you can rely a little bit more on fat as your primary substrate, then that might be a great time to incorporate that in the morning. So that would be my answer.
I think that's a great answer.
Okay. Cool.
All right.
Shannon?
I think that's it for questions, unless anybody has anything else that they just thought of. Corinna, thank you so much. I feel like that was such a great resource for so many people. And I'm, you know, yeah, we love working with you, both as a source of knowledge and as a super inspiring athlete, and most importantly, as a super nice person. So thanks so much. And guys, thanks for attending. Remember, this will be emailed to you in the next 24 hours. If you don't see it, check your spam or your junk mailbox. And if you don't see it in those, then feel free to email us and we'll make sure that you get a copy. All right.
Thank you guys so much. Appreciate it.
Take care. Have a good night.